Okay, participants are coming in. All right, it looks like we have about 45 people in the audience. So good evening, everyone. I am Lee Knuckles, a college counselor from Fountain Valley School here in Colorado Springs. On behalf of the Rocky Mountain College Night Planning Committee, I want to welcome you to the financial aid session. This session will be recorded, and this session will end at 7:30. Tonight, we have with us April Gamble from the College of Worcester as our moderator. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to April.
Thanks so much, Lee, and thank you to all the organizers and all the families and students who are here. We're really happy to be here to talk a little bit about financial aid, affordability, and applying for aid. So what I'm going to do is let our panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to have each panelist talk a little bit about some of their areas of expertise. And then I'm going to have each panelist share, a little bit of advice that they would like to give to families starting out in this process. And then we are really excited to be able to take your questions. So please do put questions in the Q&A. We'll try to get to all of them. And just as a reminder, this session is being recorded, so you will have access to it at some point. So thanks so much. Why don't you all go ahead and introduce yourselves? I'll let you pick your turn.
I can go ahead and start. Hi, everyone. My name is Rayanne Mena, and I'm Assistant Director of Admission at St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri. My background with financial aid and admissions, I've been in college admissions for over 20 years and worked at 4 different institutions. So I have seen the financial aid process from merit-based to need-based, worked exclusively with families as their first-year admissions counselor, financial aid counselor, walked them through financial aid packages. So I'm always happy to answer questions about financial aid. I think one piece of advice that comes to mind right away is don't discount a school when you're looking through their brochure and you see that sticker price, because that sticker price that's often on the back of the brochure is not where you're going to pay. There's going to be merit-based, need-based aid, different factors that might come into play there. And so we really encourage students to not worry when you see that sticker price. Look beyond that at first, really research the school, and the rest of the pieces will fall into place.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Wells. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Boston College. I have worked both on the high school side and the college side for over 25 years. So my whole entire professional experience has been centered around the college application process and helping students through that, whether as their high school counselor or whether as an admissions counselor. So I have had some experience with regard to financial aid, certainly on the admissions side, being somewhat familiar, but a little bit more involved when I was working with my students as a high school counselor and their families as they navigated how to apply for financial aid, as well as when they received their financial aid packages, how to evaluate those. If I was going to give a big piece of advice, my big piece of advice would be to start the conversation now, and hopefully by all of you attending this session tonight, that is going to be a good springboard to begin your conversation as a family. Nothing was so frustrating and disheartening when you would have a student who would be so excited about their admission to various colleges, and then over the weekend had a conversation with their parent, and they would walk into my office on Monday morning and would be having a little bit different feeling, because over the weekend they had a frank and honest conversation with their families about what their family can afford to contribute towards their education, and for some of their schools that they were admitted to, it wasn't going to be a possibility. So it really should be a conversation that families and students have at this point, what's realistic for their family. But it is important to keep an open mind as well. And we're going to touch upon some of those points this evening. So thanks so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gary Ross, and I'm representing Colgate University. I've been involved in higher education for more than 30 years. Actually, when I moved to Colgate, I moved from wonderful Colorado, where I spent also many wonderful years. My advice would be, I'll give two pieces of quick advice. They're both fairly similar to what you've just heard from my colleagues who spoke before me. One would be, um, don't assume that because a college is not a state university or a public university, that it might not actually wind up costing you less or almost the same as what you would pay if you were going to that very fine state or public university that you were otherwise considering. It really is important. We respect the fact that you need to focus on cost, that expenses are a major part of your decision. That's not something you should be embarrassed about. That's not something you should apologize for. We respect it. But what we ask you to do in return is not make any assumptions just because a college might be coming from the private sector that they are by definition more expensive. In many cases, you will find that is not the case once you receive your aid package. And then secondly, and this always is heartbreaking, and it's very similar to what Danielle just said, but I think it bears repeating. It amazes me that each year we find out about people who consider the college or university experience that they would fulfill their dream, the ideal college or university experience. They can't pursue it, not because they wouldn't have qualified for financial aid, but because they never applied for financial aid at the time of their application. And with many schools, they're on a budget, just like you are. And once their allotment of financial aid is spent, they may not have more to be able to spend if you forgot to apply for financial aid, or if you never consulted with your parents about whether or not you should be applying for financial aid in the first place. So have those discussions. And students, since this is all about you, remember that you may need to drive the conversation here. You may need to sit down with your parents and say, I'm getting ready to submit my applications and it's asking if I need financial aid. Could we talk about that? So have that conversation. It's very important. And Danielle, I hope you'll forgive me for reiterating that excellent point that you made.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adrienne Loveland, and I'm the Assistant Director of Admission for the University of Wyoming in Laramie, Wyoming. And I have been in higher ed for about 18 years. And I am a part of the WUI program, or Western Undergraduate Exchange. So I love talking about that and kind of debunking some of the myths that people just assume go with WUI or how that works. But I've been in this job for, like my colleagues, for a very long time. So that we've dealt with a lot of different situations. And so we're happy to help answer all your questions. A piece of advice that I would give you, and it kind of ties into everything everyone else has said, but I think we get sometimes a little shy, a little embarrassed to ask these questions, to clarify what some of these terms in financial aid mean, what it means to get a package, and when you get that, what exactly everything genuinely means and what the college is offering you. So I always tell families, with financial aid, with finances in general, there is never a dumb question, because this is a lot to take in. This is a lot to understand and a very big investment. So ask all the questions, ask them a lot of times. Make sure that you understand and have a clear picture of what that financial aid package from the institution you want to go to means.
Thanks. Those are just excellent pieces of advice. And I think, you got to some of the big questions that families have already. How do you apply for financial aid? What is the difference between financial aid and merit aid? How will I know if I qualify for financial aid? So let me throw that question out there. And first of all, let me just acknowledge too that all of you are coming from schools where you know, there are wonderful counselors at your school. Given that they put together an event like this, they are great resources for some of those questions that Adrian reminds you. There's never a bad question. It's a new process for lots of families, so don't be afraid to ask. But who wants to take on that question? You know, how do you even know if you're eligible for financial aid? Does someone want to start with that?
I can just quickly start. So one of the things that every college and university is required by law to have is this kind of like typically on their financial aid websites called the net price calculator. And this is a pretty detailed thing that students and their families can utilize. It'll ask you several questions about, you know, income, or, you know, do you own property? Do you not? And through answering all these questions, it will give you a general financial aid estimate as to what your family could expect at a particular university. And again, every single school by law is required to have that on their financial aid website. So I would say that that's probably a good place to start as you're navigating colleges, particularly if you're looking at any of the schools that perhaps you might think due to the cost of attendance might be prohibitive for your family. It's always a good idea to go on net price calculator, and some schools will actually use a secondary calculator as well called My Intuition. So at BC, we have both of those. One is, you know, 6 questions, nice, quick and dirty. The other one's a little bit more extensive, but a little bit more accurate. And so it helps for families to go log in, utilize those calculators to get a sense as to what a financial aid package could look like for their specific family. I would also encourage families to also do some research about merit scholarships. Not every school awards merit scholarships, but that can oftentimes be a very influential aspect of the financial aid process. Certain schools, if they offer merit scholarships, you have to apply by a certain date. You may have to fill out a separate application. This is one of the challenges of applying to colleges, is that we all don't do everything the same. We don't always have the same timeline. We don't always have the same forms and requirements. So it is important to be informed. Everything that's associated with regards to financial aid is stuff you can easily find on the internet. So you should not be having to pay anybody for anything. The only thing you might have to pay for is if there's one financial aid document called the CSS profile that does cost money to apply. There are fee waivers available for families as well. But anything else associated with financial aid you can find through calling, you know, a college or university's financial aid office, calling their admission office, going on their website, going on the internet. But in general, you would have to kind of do a little bit of research from each individual school to find out if they do award any type of merit aid, which is aid kind of based on a student's academic talents. And if so, how? If there's a separate application, if that's automatic, if they have explicit information about students with a certain GPA or certain SAT score or ACT score will receive certain amounts of money. So starting on the school's financial aid website is probably the best place to go. Again, both for that net price calculator, as well as additional information about how they award financial aid and any other scholarships that they may be awarding students.
I want to give a special plug, if I could, April, to the My Tuition program, My Intuition program that Danielle mentioned. It is, as she said, 6 questions, and it's not guaranteed to give you an aid estimate to the penny or even to the dollar, but it is a really, really useful tool that can give you an indication of whether you might be in a circumstance where you would apply for aid and receive any, or perhaps much more than you thought you might have received. Very quick example, last spring, I had a phone call with a person who was involved in the medical field, medical professional, and that individual was telling me they had no idea that they would qualify for financial aid. But this was about to be what is now their 3rd child in college at the same time. And when you plugged in what was a very attractive income level, but with 3 college tuition bills, all of a sudden that individual did qualify for some need-based financial aid. So it's a really quick exercise, but well worth the time for every family to at least start their financial aid research by going on to My Intuition.
Yeah, I think one of the questions here is important to answer given what we're talking about right now. And so there are two people who have asked, will applying for financial aid hinder our chances of getting into a certain university? So Rayanne or Adrienne, does one of you want to take that, or both of you want to take that question? And filling out and filing for financial aid hurt your chances of being accepted by a school?
It's funny because I think Adrienne and I are probably the wrong two to ask because we work at places where it doesn't have an impact. I'm speaking for Adrienne just because we recruit in the same circuit. So we might need to punt that back to Danielle and Gary. I do just want to say really quickly before we move on from the net price calculator that Danielle mentioned, if a school offers merit aid, that is the net price calculator is also a great tool to find out what that might look like. Our net price calculator, because we do offer merit aid, does ask for GPA, information and would indicate what a potential merit scholarship. So Adrienne, are you good with punting that question back to the experts?
I am. Just we're a different kind of school, so I would rather they get some really good information on that. So yeah, thanks for taking that on, Danielle and Gary.
Sure. The answer is it could, and here's why. There are some schools, not many, but there are some schools that are need blind. The institution I represent, Colgate University, is not need blind. We're what's called need aware. At the end of our process, typically that could impact about 1% or less of our applicants each year. But even if it impacts one applicant, we need to say, if we are going to conduct our matters in an honest, straightforward way, we need to say that we are need aware. Having said that, we review applications initially without regard to financial aid status. Then Rand and I were just on a previous call, and I was saying in answer to another question that colleges and universities are on a budget just like all of you are. And it may be that when we get to the end of the process, we'll see that we've spent all of the financial aid that we have allocated for a particular class. And at that point, we have to go back and look at some people. In this case, as I mentioned, it's a very, very tiny number, but some people who may have been admitted, but for whom we simply don't have any financial aid left. And at that point, yes, that decision would be impacted by financial aid. Again, it doesn't happen often, but it does happen, and you have the right to know that.
Danielle, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I was going to add is just to underscore Gary's final point, in the sense of that is your right as families to know that. And so that's an easy question you can always ask of an admission officer or ask of a financial aid counselor, asking if their institutions do take a student applying for financial aid as a part of their process. At BC, we are need blind, so we never look at a family's ability or inability to pay for the cost of attendance. We admit our students, and then all those names go over to financial aid and they work their magic. So we don't go back at some later point and make adjustments based on that. But as Gary said, not every institution can do that. And so there are institutions that are sensitive to the need and would rather admit students and be able to fully fund the students they admit rather than admit students and only be able to give them a portion of what they might need in order to make that college a reality for that family. So while in some instances it doesn't seem fair, and it's probably the thing about the whole admissions process that bothers me the most is I would like for kids to be able to get into the places they want to get into and be able to receive the aid that they need in order to make those institutions a reality for them. But unfortunately, different colleges have different budgets, and some have a wealth of resources in terms of financial aid, and some don't. In places like the Ivy League institutions, I mean, whatever you need, you're going to get. And a lot of those schools are going to give you financial aid with no loans. So all of your financial aid would be scholarship based money that you do not need to pay back. But most institutions aren't in the caliber that the Ivy Leagues are in terms of the money and resources that they have. And so they have to be very careful with the financial aid that they are awarding and that they are spending. So the positive element about schools that are need aware or need sensitive is the fact that they are committed to funding the students that they are enrolling, and making sure that they don't overspend. So again, it doesn't always seem like a fair process, but I'd rather a student, if I were a high school counselor, I'd rather know that my student was going to get the full aid that they need, rather than be given only half of the money that they would need in order to make that a reality. But yes, the short answer is that for some schools, as Gary said, it certainly can play a role. For other schools, it will not. But that is certainly a question that you are well within your right to ask colleges and universities.
Could I just also add, for the benefit, I hope, of the individual who asked that excellent question, that I would suggest that the questioner also focus a little bit on the back end of the college process. And what I mean by that is, on the front end, you're worried, rightly so and appropriately so, if financial aid might impact your admission decision. But if you really love a particular college and think it's the perfect match for you, suppose you don't apply, then you'll never know if that college would have admitted you anyway, and you'll never know if you would have gotten a package that would have made your attendance at that college or university affordable and accessible. My suggestion is to also focus on the back end, because if you do get admitted, what if that dream college of yours winds up admitting you, but is going to graduate you with a mountain of debt? And you're going to wind up paying off that experience for a good part, if not the rest of your life. At Colgate, our average graduate who incurs debt graduates after 4 full years with $14,900 in debt. That's a very affordable amount that you can pay off at a very young age. And we also, Danielle referred to some schools that waive loans. We do waive loans for any student who comes from a family income background of $125,000 or less. So just because we might take into consideration financial aid status in admission, if you choose not to apply for just that reason, and you come from a family with a family income background of $125,000 or less, you might be missing out on an aid package where you would be receiving, if you were admitted, 100% grant, and you would not have to pay off any loans at the time of your graduation. So please focus appropriately so on the front end, but also the back end.
I have a question I want to throw out to folks, which is about another side of financial aid, which is thinking about work study on campus or having a job on campus. So could each of you talk a little bit about what that might look like at your institution? Can students work? If so, what are some of the benefits of working and earning some money on campus? And we'll start maybe with St. Louis and University of Wyoming, because we didn't get you in that last answer.
Sure, yeah, and thanks for taking the punt, guys, because Adrian and I, we are need blind and not those kinds of schools. So thanks for taking that. Work study is something I love talking about, working on campus. So 2 differentiations there. A lot of times when we're talking about work study, most schools are using it as a part of the financial aid package or award. Schools are allotted a certain amount of financial aid to award as part of the financial aid process that allows the student to work for a certain amount of hours during a semester to earn some money for their tuition. A lot of times the students will earn maybe $3,000 a year. And what we find is that that might be money that needs to be applied directly to tuition to finish paying off the balance, or sometimes an outside scholarship comes in or a summer job pays that bill and the student can keep the money they earn weekly as they're spending money for the year. So a couple different options there. If you get work study as part of your financial aid package, you can either turn the checks over to the school, pay off your balance, or if the balance is already paid, another way you can keep it as spending money. A great thing about those jobs is they are on campus. They run, traditionally they run the semester. So when you have finals, they know it, and you're able to kind of wind things down and be able to prepare for finals and things like that. But at the same time, a lot of us have non-work study jobs on campus. So sometimes it's a work study job to, check books in at the library, and sometimes it can also be a non-work study job. And so there are going to be, even if you don't qualify for work study as part of your financial aid package, you can still have the opportunity to work on campus and earn that paycheck. In those cases, it's probably not going to tuition, and maybe more of your spending money or to pay for travel, books, those types of things. That was my quick go at it. Adrienne, I don't know what else if you have stuff you want to add to it.
Yeah, we get often asked if you can have work study and work on campus. And I mean, you can, but to that time management also comes in because you are there to be a student. So we want you to make sure that your grades aren't going to suffer or you're going to get stressed, but you can do both depending. And there are a lot of campuses across the country that have a high percentage of their on-campus jobs dedicated just to work study positions. So you might get the fun jobs like working in the bookstore or working at the gym or with athletics, and they make sure they reserve those for those financial aid packages. But this is a really good question to ask each individual school how they handle that, how it's awarded. Like Rayanne was saying, sometimes you get a paycheck. There are some schools, if you get work study, you may not get that paycheck. It's automatically applied to your tuition, and you're working that amount off. So it's all in that conversation about financial aid and making sure, again, that you understand where that funding's coming from, how you're receiving it, and if you're going to be getting it every year, if you need to reapply, just making sure, again, that you really understand what you're receiving.
Danielle and Gary, did you want to add anything to that?
Just two quick things. Number one, that one of in terms of the benefits of work study, as both Rayanne and Adrienne said, you're there to be a student first. And so when you have work study, you typically have a limited number of hours you're allowed to work every week, which I suppose could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how much money you're looking to earn. But the positive thing about it is it allows you to work, it allows you to gain some funding, while simultaneously not taking away from your academics or taking away from your studies, so that you're not spending, your time working 80 hours a week and 20 hours on your academics. You have a better balance. I will definitely say one of the big advantages in working on campus is the fact that it really connects you to a wide range of people. If you're working in the dining hall, you might get a nice little extra snack or an extra meal for free. So that's always nice. My work study job when I was a student was working in our alumni office. And so it was great networking with alums from my alma mater. And that's actually how I got my first job. Was I ran into my old boss on campus, and he told me about a position in admissions, and here I am 20 something years later. So it really is a nice way for you to get to know different adults on campus. Sometimes they can be very influential individuals. So if you're working in the dean's office or if you're working in athletics, those are good people to make connections with. And that can help you throughout your 4 years in terms of them offering advice, or if you're experiencing any challenges, they can point you in which direction, as well as kind of when you're looking beyond your 4 years and you're thinking about work, or you're thinking about graduate studies. They can often be really great for you in terms of letters of recommendation, or connecting you with alums, or connecting you with students that have worked in their office before. So it's a really great networking opportunity, as well as a nice little money earning opportunity as well.
Just a very quick point, because really you've gotten some excellent advice on this topic. The only thing I could add is there are occasionally jobs that are not run through your college or university that are right off campus that might pay, let's say 50 cents or $1 an hour higher. I would urge caution before you run out and accept one of those positions, because at the colleges and universities, You will have bosses who will understand the pressure that you are under as a student, and that there might be times where you need to ask for a day off or a shift off so you can study for an exam or prepare for a major presentation. If you're working for a private employer, I'm not going to say they're all like this, but there are certainly some that do not care whether you have exams or any other kinds of pressures coming up. You either show up for that job or the job isn't yours anymore. That just won't happen if you communicate effectively with your boss on a campus position. So I hope that if you're offered a work study opportunity, that you'll pursue it on the campus where you are a student.
Sorry, we have a really interesting question that I think is, it's one of those questions that points us all in reminding us that, financial aid is also it's very personal, and each family is going to approach it a little bit differently in terms of how much debt, for example, you and your family are willing to take on, or who else you're willing to ask to help support you if it's another family member, or how much you want your child working during the summer or over breaks to earn money for college. So the question is, in terms of a quote safety school, what kind of financial opportunities should I be thinking about? And maybe the way to address this, because it's sort of impossible to be specific about this, is just to remind, each of us can think of a way to talk to our listeners about why it is such a personal decision, and why, what are some of the creative ways to maybe think through, whether it's outside scholarships, whether it's working during the summer. We just talked about working on campus, ways to save money, ways to plan for college. So maybe just, it's a great big question. So we'll maybe address it in smaller ways too. I'll start by just saying, sorry, I'll start by just saying the idea of outside scholarships is one that we get often. I know that, so my daughter is a high school senior, and I know that our county has several small scholarships offered to students. Each college is going to, for some colleges, if you have $1,000 scholarship, that might impact your financial aid package. It might not. It really depends on the college and on what kind of aid you're receiving. But it is worth it to go out and look in your community to see if there are scholarships that could be appropriate for your student. If it's that they are, a child of a teacher, for example, there are specific scholarships that are just for that. Our high school has scholarships for students who have been active in social justice causes recently. If you're someone interested in the performing arts, there's some specific scholarships outside of the college or university that you could also look at.
Yeah, this question, when I saw it come in, intrigued me because it reminded me of a situation that I went through with a family friend, and from a very early age, this family knew that their oldest son was, testing off the charts and got a perfect, score in the ACT as a sophomore, and so they had built their college search around applying to top of the top, and apply to just Ivy Leagues and great schools that we all know and love. And when it all came down to it, at the end, he ended up staying in state and going to his, flagship in-state school, because the family, in their mind, when they found out in freshman, sophomore year that their son was off the charts and brilliant, and they just assumed the scholarship offers were going to come pouring in and they would not have to pay for college because their son was brilliant. And so when it came down to the family did very well. So financially, they did not qualify for much. And it was a very interesting process to watch, because I think there are some that have the mindset of, there is shooting for the stars and getting into the, the Ivy Leagues and some of these big name schools. And then there's the financial realities of, families thinking that their students were going to get a certain amount of merit scholarship and all of that. So I went through this personally, and it is a really interesting mindset. And I think that's why you see some schools with some, pretty strong merit scholarships, meant to reward the student who might look elsewhere at a big name school, but would maybe be attracted by this, nice scholarship to come here and do the research and go to medical school from our, college or university. So I think that there is something to that question, and just wanted to offer that perspective of that balance when it comes to looking at safety schools.
And I think often we, going off what Rayanne said, is that there's these full rides everywhere. And really a full ride is kind of subjective to each school because they may piece things together. It may be some merit aid, your financial aid, and external scholarships, and there is the full ride. So really investigating that and finding out if that is a possibility and what that exactly means. And I think Danielle said it earlier, but I can't drive this point home enough, but having the conversation as a family with where this money is going to come from, because this time of year, your senior year, it's too late. Now is the time to have that. It can be a hard conversation, parents. I'm a parent too, and that makes me uncomfortable thinking about that we have to talk about our finances, but it's so important that there's a realistic expectation of this is what we can do or this is what we cannot do, so that it isn't a surprise, and that, like Rayanne's family, you're not waiting for this magical scholarship at all the schools you apply to, because you also have to realize you are special and you are a really great student, but there's a whole bunch of you applying to all these schools. And we wish, all of us, we had these magical pots of money that we could just give to every single student. But the reality is we don't have that. We also have to keep our lights on. So we want you to always look at this as an investment that we're going to give, but you're going to have to give a little bit too. So it's great that you're at this session to ask these questions and kind of get a plan together on what you're going to do as a family to figure out where this cost is going to start coming from. And even at a safety school, if that's what we're going to call them, they still are not going to come in free or have all these magical pots of money too. Every school is going to have a cost associated with it.
And one thing I'll just add is I think it's important to diversify your college list, because if you think about the word safety school academically could look different from safety school financially. And so when you are looking at colleges, I think it is important to have a diversity of schools. Maybe you, are a strong academic student and you're going to shoot for the stars and shoot for some of the more selective institutions out there. Those are schools that do have generous financial aid. And so maybe financial aid, won't be a huge factor when it comes to your financial aid packages from those institutions. But being diverse in the sense of maybe you pick schools where academically you're at the top of their academic pool. And so maybe you might be rewarded with a merit scholarship offer, or you pick schools, your home state institution. And that was always a piece of advice I always gave any of my high school juniors when they were starting the college process, is that, I wanted them to pick at least one in-state school, because no financial aid across the board, just simply cost of tuition, that is always going to be the cheapest. It may not be the least expensive for that family in the final analysis when financial aid is awarded and you look at all your various financial aid packages, but the discount that you get by being an in-state student, just simply on sticker price alone can't be matched. And so it's always important, I think, to have at least one state school, but also understand that depending on where you are, state schools can be more expensive. In Colorado, you may have some nice in-state scholarships based on where you are in your class, based on your certain GPA or certain test scores. So it is important to get a broad range of colleges on your list so that you also have some financial aid flexibility as well.
And we're going to have to wrap up in a minute. So I just want to go back to what people said at the beginning, which is don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if you're a first generation family to college, or your family is coming from another country where, college systems are very, very different in terms of affordability. Don't be afraid to go to your counselors with your family, and ask those questions and get the support you need. So Lee, thank you so much. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your time and expertise with us this evening. So immediately after this, we go to the Q&A with the college representatives, and that's for students, and that goes until 8 p.m. You need to visit the event webpage. I put that address in the chat so you can grab that before we are closed, so that you can go to the StriveScan website, and that'll give you access to where all the meeting rooms are. So that's strivescan.com/CO Colorado 2021. All right, so we wish you great conversations. Good night, everyone.